Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming and to the very first session of our documentary theater. And welcome everybody, and welcome our most honorable guests from the overseas and our speakers. And because it is the very first session, so I would like to give a very short note. Well, first of all, I'm Hoi Fai Wu, the artistic director of Pen's Theatre Production, the presenter of this festival. Documentary theatre is often about history, and this place, this academy, has a very special place in my personal history. I study theatre here, and it is the place where the door to the fascinating world of theatre was open to me. And almost 15 years ago, when I first heard about this term, documentary theatre, it opened another door to me. Documentary theatre made me see the theatre and the world in a new perspective. So I wanted so much to bring documentary theatre back to the APA. And here I would like to thank Professor Sherlock so much for his forward-looking vision. Because about 2 years ago, he asked me to teach a subject, documentary/verbatim theatre in the academy. And of course I said yes. I was more than happy to share what I have learned about documentary theatre with the students here. And when I knew I got the funding to hold this conference, this festival, I wished so much for it to be held at the APA. Because I would like to be in here, that I could open the door to more people who may be interested in the theatre, in the world, people like you. And then I asked Professor Sherlock to help, and I knew he has put in so much effort in persuading the Academy to be our co-presenter. And now, voila, here we are. And thank you so much indeed, Professor Sherlock, to make this happen. Now, before we start the first session, well, as an opening, I would like to ask Professor Sherlock to give us a speech for this special moment.
Thank you. Mr. Wu Hoi Fai, Artistic Director, Artistic Director of Pen's Theatre, colleague and alumnus of the APA and School of Drama. APS. Okay. Two distinguished guests, scholars, theatre practitioners and students, welcome to the Hong Kong Academy for the Performing Arts and to the School of Drama and to this conference, and we are delighted that it's held here at the Academy. When Hoi Fai talked about a conference, masterclasses, presentations of work on documentary theatre 2 years ago, it sounded like a festival and one that the school and the academy should be part of and be at its centre. Not least because this would be the first major exploration of the diverse spectrum of documentary theatre in Hong Kong ever, and something that we felt would be an important and informative addition to the increasing diverse spectrum of theatre practice, strategies and methodologies in Hong Kong theatre making. It's a propitious time in Hong Kong, as now 20 years this month, we mark the handover of Hong Kong from British colonial rule and its return to the motherland. And there is much reality to document, much history to revisit, strategies and important ways of telling these stories. Much has been unsaid, much is said, much needs to be seen, much unspoken heard. Documentary theatre may be a way of empowering some of Hong Kong's current histories. In 2014, in our school's Black Box Theatre, Director Akti Tang and students created for me one of the most significant productions in the school's recent history, as it documented and reenacted the students' own engagement in September 2014, the Umbrella Movement, when the Academy was marooned and cordoned off as we are only several hundred yards away from Lechko. It's reminded me then how important to bear witness to real events is as a power and responsible part of theatre making. So not surprisingly, when Wu Haifai talked to me about the Festival of Documentary Theatre, around that time I welcomed it as being insightful and important. So we're now delighted that Mr. Wu teaches the documentary theatre course and at undergraduate and postgraduate levels on our program, and we're delighted to be able to be part of this sharing of the two-day conference at the Academy. For myself, I must confess, I'm here to learn and to celebrate documentary theatre from the stellar list of experts, scholars and practitioners and artists who will share with us over the next 2 days. Thanks, Haifai and Pans Theatre, and I look forward to a fruitful and exhilarating conference. You're all most welcome here at the Academy.
Thank you very much, Professor So now I announce the official opening of the conference, and yes, and we have as an opening, of course, we have a ceremony. So this is the time for the ceremony, and we have a souvenir to give to our co-presenter, the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, for helping us to make this meaningful event happen. So the section is arranged in this way that each of the speakers will talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and yes, and and then we have the assistant to remind us the length of the presentation, and at the last 5 minutes we will have a signal there. But in fact, take your time. And then the final minute, we have another signal. Yes. Okay. So, but don't worry. Take your time. Yes. And then after the two distinguished speakers talk, we can open the floor to have more interaction and discussion with the floor. Okay. So, now I give back the time to Professor Sherlock to share with us his topic. His topic is making drama out of a crisis. Please,
thank you,
Professor Sherlock.
I also love the part that there's a ritual involved in real theatre. It makes me comfortable as a ritualist. Making drama out of a crisis. Theatre and society, that's the topic for this session. So forgive me if I'm a little bit general in terms of what I understand to be the responsibilities of theatre and society and their umbilical connection. So some formative thoughts and some, I think, impertinent questions, but forgive me for asking them, about the crisis in the mimetic tradition and the rise of documentary theatre. In the post-dramatic theatre, PDT world, as identified in anticipation of a change in the millennium by Hans Thies Lehrmann, mainstream drama, either in form or content, could no longer be seen adequately to represent an ever more complex society. Global historic and technological events had changed us, and these were refracted in the society in which we live. Lehmann, much as Roland Barthes had done some 30 years earlier, saw linearity of narrative as the constriction of story rather than its liberation. He hinted at the problem with actors and actor training. I'm very sensitive to this. That despite the attempts of Stanislavski et al. To present real life on stage, we end up merely presenting the redacted voices of stereotypes ventriloquized by the dramatist. The well-made play and the singular arc of character, however complexly drawn, could not contain the polyphony of voices and catastrophe enfolding in society. The dramatic, we might infer from his argument, had relocated or been made redundant in the face of the tragedy of our humanity, where the dramatic takes place every day and every minute in real life. Lehmann saw this as a dislocation of theatre from drama and a failure of the mission of mimesis. For him, the future of theatre and its relationship to society was the domain of the new deconstructivists, with their fragmentation of narrative, cacophony of conflicting voices, presentations of multiple coexisting personalities, and the blurred fissures of memory, history, fact, and fiction personified in the real presence of contemporary theatre. A post-dramatic theatre, then, we could infer, to be witnessed and validated by an audience who are engaged, open to act, interact, participate, and co-create, and who are willing to be both involved and offended. Since Lehmann and the lively debate that ensued from his work, many have been led to some fundamental questions about the givens of mainstream and traditional theatre. For example, the question about actors. Do they longer represent real people in their complexity? Does it therefore require now real people themselves to express and authenticate their own voices? Are actors only permissible as long as the script is verbatim and as a second best choice? Should collective devising and collaborative creation be the real king of contemporary content? Or is the authentic story located in the social voice, the tribunal, exposing injustice, the politics of protest, and the reality vision of crowd event or spontaneous social happening? Questions, too, of the role of authors of plays, well-made or otherwise. Are they redundant, or at best consigned to dramaturgy? Or is even that position also too dangerous, lest they might distort the raw, real story into narrative, plot, event, and constrain the medium and its message? And what of directors? Are they better to be seen as facilitators, editors, strategists, enablers, community activists, rather than dictators of style, the arbiters of taste, and preservers of tradition? Whilst for the mainstream theatre makers these insinuations might be considered at best a challenge, or at worst a declaration of a dereliction of duty, of an abnegation of a responsibility to society, to hold, as 'twere, the mirror up to nature. In other words, there is, it appears, an avoidance for some of drama's mimetic obligation to represent society, to reflect it, express expose it, to challenge its image of itself, to question its social and political structures. A reluctance really to explore the darker sides of unethical and immoral behavior in favor of an aesthetic directorial egotism, and or the inability of the conventional structures, conventions themselves, strategies and dramatic methodologies adequately to express more than the bourgeois imaginings of self-reflecting authors and self-indulgent actors, feigning reality, afraid of exposing themselves and audiences to the facts of reality itself. Not everyone took kindly to Lehmann's implications, surprisingly, and certainly not Eleanor Fuchs, author of the seminal Death of the Character, Reflections on Theatre After Modernism, whose celebrated contestation redresses the continuity and contingency of the post-dramatic and postmodern theatre within the spectrum of development and implicit search for innovative strategies for theatrical communication. Whilst the scholar and critic Patrice Pavis states that for the post-dramatic, the principal enemy of the post-dramatic is representation. The long-standing ambition of the dramatic theatre to represent through text or acting a conflict between two characters, a place and time distinct from the scenic event in any specific staging. In place of figuring forth what the text is saying, PDT, post-dramatic theatre, prefers to exhibit, to expose the mechanisms of language, to treat the text as sound object rather than to be concerned with the word's direct references. But all's not entirely lost, Pavis continues. The playwrights often cited by the post-dramatic, such as Müller, Jelinek, Goetz, Polish, Kane, Krimp, Durin, Bernard, Vinaver, Fosse, Lagrache, all thought of as not writing for the stage, but against it, or at best despite it. Such staging does not illustrate nor explicate the text, but rather stages a mechanism for opening texts out onto new perspectives. Not within a socio-psychological framework, but in one of play, of gestural and visual impulses, bringing about a rediscovery of text and stage and provoking a confrontation between them. These are the authors of little or no stage directions, no character, of multiple personalities, of non-linear, often fragmentary narratives, no conventions or multiple and new conventions, deconstructed and open to be either or deconstructed by directors and or creative collaborators. These are the authors of the polyphonic and cacophony of repetition, of reference, referencing, and intertextuality. Authors who are as poetic in their foul language as they are in capturing the trite but significant vernacular of our everyday speech acts. These are the authors for whom stories of the self hold as much status as the so-called classical canon, both of which can equally be forged and cross-fertilized for content. These are the authors who know no boundaries in scenography, who call for impossible, imaginative mise en scène and in-your-face exposure to violence and atrocity. These are the authors who see little or no distinction between an actor and a character presented. These are the authors who need the audience to be engaged, confronted, challenged, and required to be present to witness the performative act. And these are the authors too who have, maybe ironically, now inspired a new generation to adopt the post-dramatic as an aesthetic style, as a new form of their artifice of theatre, as legitimacy for their confrontational presentations, actually of their conventionally dramatic but now restyled presentations. No longer the great German male hegemony of directors, Peter Stein, Peter Zadek, not even Frank Karstoff, but of Thomas Ostermeyer, Ivo van Hove, Benedict Andrews, and Katie Mitchell. Here I find that Lehmann's critique of the state of Western German theatre approaching the millennium also exposed a fundamental fissure in the mission of the mimetic tradition. It pricked the cowardice in the conscience of those that take theatre's responsibility of the representation of actuality and fact, of society unexpurgated or presenting real life and reality on stage. It challenged theatre to step up to its social responsibility to hold the mirror up to unexpurgated nature, to reflect, refract, give voice to and challenge society, to present people's stories as they are in their complexity, contradiction, conflict, ugliness and fact. It re-questioned, I believe, the vitality of the connection between theatre and society. Others, before Brecht and beyond him, have drawn attention to this inadequacy of the artifice, art, and aesthetics of many of the forms of mimesis, the Aristotelian principles of empathy, and that often debated context and need for catharsis. The emphasis on emotion rather than intellect, of spectacle and entertainment rather than education, of dictation and conclusion rather than reflection and choice. Synchronous with this critique, amongst many other factors pressing on the mimetic mission, was the distrust of the establishment and all things connected to it. The onward march of technological change in a convergence culture. The quest for 24-hour television content. The ubiquity and distrust of copy. And most importantly, the sharpening of the dialectic of the value of liveness against mediatization. In a McLuhan world of medium is message, the post-dramatic theatre sought alternative dramaturgies to search for meaning and shape its content. One such might be seen to be located in a renewed appreciation of the performative power and social impact of documentary theatre, and what is sometimes clumsily called reality trending theatre, or perhaps best named in Professor Carol Martin's open and more nuanced phrase, the theatre of the real. In the face of this ever ubiquitous televisual, broadcast, multi-platform, digital, social media culture, often more dramatic than drama, that dramatizes the reality experience of our domestic and quotidian experiences, its popular forms pervasive in our daily vocabularies, in our behavior, negotiation, and expressions of our own situation. The theatre, it seemed, needed to polarize and diversify in its search for strategies for its continued validity and self-justification. But this ubiquitous culture has its own built-in critique, for if 24-hour news exposes injustices and atrocities, it too is also part of the fictionalization of reality itself, of the dramatization of social suffering, of the pornography of atrocity or natural disaster, and in particular, conflict situations in what is glibly termed the theatre of war. In a strong theatrical tradition of historical veracity, and what has also been called the theatre of fact, documentary dramaturgies for the creation of relevant work might be seen, therefore, as an appropriate locus for relevant, vibrant, and socially connected theatre beyond the post-dramatic. I'm of course not implying that this was necessarily a formal choice, but rather instinctively perceived as a place where the collective conscience of theatre might find many more possibilities for an authentic and engaged relationship between theatre with the society, between theatre and its own society, and for the pursuit of the mimetic mission, especially in the face of what Lehmann calls obvious and significant global events. For those interested, Andy Lavender in Performance in the 21st Century, Theatres of Engagement helpfully, I think, and usefully parses these well, and takes the timeline beyond Lehmann's time frame, 1989, 2001, to 2011 and beyond to 2014, from the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9/11, and up to and including the Syrian War. I understand mimesis as the representation or presentation, and indeed also the act of witnessing society, rather than its mere impersonation. And I see this as one of the primary functions of theatre's relationship with society. However, how theatre does this, in what form, in what way, in which location, and how this act of verisimilitude might take place, is open to a range of possibilities, from the researched to the constructed, to the participatory to the spontaneous, real, non-art presentations, all of which are embraced and are already included in the spectrum of the documentary theatre tradition. I come from the British tradition, surprise, in which I grew up. So, for me, theatre workshops, Oh What a Lovely War, 1963, a Brechtian collection of researched authentic war memories presented as a musical, was one of my first understandings of documentary theatre. It researched authentic voices, real people's stories, set in an ironic form in a musical offered to the audience at both a critical distance as well as empathy for the subjects and subject matter. And this, of course, together with Peter Brook's US, 1966, were landmark productions in Britain, and where the methodology derived from these plays was pioneered in local theatre by people like Peter Cheeseman at Victoria Theatre, Stoke-on-Trent, and developed in different ways by the community plays of Angelico, by Max Stafford Clark, and at the verbatim and tribunal plays pioneered at the Tricycle Theatre by Nicholas Kent. Some significant moments in this tradition for me personally have been Tricycle's The Colour of Justice, 1999, the Laramie Project, 2000, National Theatre of Scotland's Black Watch, 2007, and in my hometown, Cardiff, Deep Cut, 2008, and Robin Soames' Crouch, Touch, Pause, Engage, 2015, as well as the recent genre-defying work of Rimini Protocol, such as Call Cutter, 2005, and 100% London, and the Gob Squad Western Society, 2013. What an array and diversity of strategies for documenting theatre. If I may boldly again quote Professor Martin, she suggests that the theatre of the real, her term, includes documentary theatre, verbatim theatre, reality-based theatre, theatre of fact, theatre of witness, tribunal theatre, non-fiction theatre, restored village performances, war and battle reenactments, and autobiographical theatre. Others in this conference will expand on these range of styles, genres within genres, and strategies in other sessions, and I look forward to that. But if there is a thread, a thin red line that goes through this work, it is giving voice and empowerment to the lesser heard, overlooked, or deliberately drowned voices in our society within the context of an active, often participatory, performative event. The styles and genres of presentation are illustrative of a diversity in approach to social engagement, and are what I should still like to call the mimetic mission. Carol Martin again. All these types of theatre claim a relationship to reality, a relationship that has generated both textual and performative innovations. The strength of documentary theatre, therefore, as I see it, now in the second decade of the new millennium, the 21st, illustrates, therefore, a vibrant and creative face beyond post-dramatic theatre. Its presence, diversity, boldness, challenge, and if I dare say, its popularity, reminds the conscience of the theatre of its obligatory relationship to society. I began with some trite questions implied by the post-dramatic paradigm shift, Perhaps they were impertinent within the context of a two-day conference investigating documentary theatre, but I hope that for those of us in particular who work within theatre education, and specifically in actor training and the nurturing of innovative theatre making, that they may help frame our fora of opinion, discussion, debate, and inspiration. But perhaps importantly also for us who work within the social benefit of a subsidized or institutional theatre environment, documentary theatre can remind us of our mimetic mission, as well as prick our social conscience and responsibility. For just as Hamlet chastises Polonius, let it also be our rebuke for overlooking the social contract between theatre and society, and for the diverse manifestations of documentary theatre that we're exploring in this conference. Let them be well used, for they are the abstract and brief chronicles of the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sherlock. And I think as well, Professor Sherlock has made several references to Professor Carol Martin, so I think maybe I go straight to invite Professor Martin to share her thesis. Her topic is International Theatre of the Real in the Digital Post-Truth Era, Children, Tigers, Wit, Artists and Citizens. Well, I feel to know what's the connection between all these. Yes.
Well, hopefully you'll find out. First of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me here. I checked my email, jobs under Hong Kong, and the first email I received from Gladys Wong was August 15th, 2015. So I've had this very event on my calendar for 2 years, almost 2 years, and I'm very happy that it's now happening. So, yeah, there are many similarities. You'll find, well, many touchstones that we share, and you'll soon hear what that is. I do have some images which will come about 1/3 of the way in my paper. So, in the post-truth era, theater artists are creating work in which part of the subject is theater's very ability to represent and interpret events. Artists are making work that raises questions about the relationship between epistemological preferences, meaning the way we know things, and ethical sensibilities. Like the proscenium within the proscenium in Paula Vogel's Indecent, which is on Broadway now, about to close, a play about a play. Some of the best theater today, reflexively, looks at its own ability to see and stage intricate and reflexive explanations of challenging subjects. Let me give you 2 examples. In 2016, Milo Rao, who we saw interviewed on tape a little bit last evening, asked this question: is it possible to perform the life of a Belgian pedophile and murderer, Marc Dutroux, with children, actors? And if so, how? Rao's answer was a definitive yes. He created 5 easy pieces at the invitation of Ghent's Campo Theatre, using Dutroux as a pivot for telling the story of Belgium from the Congo's declaration of independence to the White March in October 1996, when upwards of 275,000 people, outraged at the failures of both the justice system and the police, marched on Brussels. Dutroux had been repeatedly released after being arrested until he was finally permanently imprisoned in 1996. The demonstration was called the White March because the protesters each carried something white as symbols of hope. In 5 easy pieces, 7 children play the part of Dutroux, his victims, parents, and a policeman. The first character we see interviewed in the play, the first of the easy pieces, is Marc Dutroux's father, played by a child, wearing old man makeup. The interview is performed to a camera and live projected onto a large upstage screen. In an online interview, Andrew Hayden observes that this scene produces several layers of reality. The reality of the father, the reality of the child, the reality of the acting talent, and the division of attention between live performance and mediatized performance, or what's on the screen. Spectators have to continually readjust their understanding of what's real is an important part of the work that forces them to deconstruct and reconstruct the ways they watch the work. This shifting understanding produces a critical response and political thought. Hayden characterizes the political thought as the realization of the similarity between the narcissistic desires of a child molester and murderer and those of an imperialist power, the arrested development of a mind or a culture that allows it to say, I want, and to take that thing and keep it captivity. Sabine Dardenne's letters to her parents while Dutroux held her captive, starved her, and sexually assaulted her are read by one of the child actors. Some scenes from Dutroux's life are reenacted, but overall, the work does not attempt to give a definitive interpretation of Dutroux's actions, nor make a kind of easy or facile equivalency between colonialism and pedophilia. Performance studies scholar Deborah Levine writes, in 5 easy pieces, finding a real Marc Dutroux is never in question. We only have access to him through vague memories of stories, documents, and scenes that show the effects of his acts. The child actors, most of whom were infants when Dutroux committed his crimes, introduced him to the audience with an uncaptioned photo projected on the screen. The children collectively recount what they know in the manner of shouting at school recess. Dutroux was a 39-year-old Belgian citizen who sexually assaulted, kidnapped, and tortured 6 young girls, ranging in age between 8 to 19 years old. In its reflexive turn, the work's use of children to enact such a subject expresses the idea that even making it might be somehow fundamentally wrong. And in the background, we see the specter of European colonialism and of child rape and murder. Political accountability and theatrical culpability, the very uncomfortable idea of children telling the story of a deadly pedophile, shadow the very idea of telling a story of a deadly pedophile with children. During rehearsals, psychologists were available to ensure the well-being of the children and their parents. 5 Easy Pieces is both live and mediatized. The stage action is captured by live feed cameras and projected on a large upstage screen. The title is from Stravinsky's 1917 5 Easy Pieces, which was designed to teach children to play the piano. In Rao's lessons, the children have to master mimicry, submission, emotion, and grief in ostensible acting exercises that, when performed, reproduce the rehearsal process. Our 5th lesson is rebellion, says Rao, a rebellion that is both allegorical and poetic. Rao, the founder of the International Institute of Political Murder, whose work uses testimony and the reference to it, if not reconstruction of real events, sees 5 Easy Pieces as an allegory for how we deal with trauma. Rao asserts, it's not a documentary play. Just as Hamlet hoped Claudius would see himself in the mousetrap play, Rao's theater holds a mirror up to our violence, politics, despair, and theater itself. But he cautions, what we need is a realism as radically deconstructive as it is old-fashioned and concrete. In other words, seeing our own image should not make us fall in love with ourselves. In the 21st century, theater of the real, including documentary theater, has several defining characteristics, including the particularization of subjectivity, the rejection of a blanket universality, an acknowledgement of the contradictions of staging the real within the frame of the fictional, and questioning the relationship between facts and truth. Increasingly, documentary theater includes the difficulty of finding out the truth as part of its very subject matter. Here's another example of theater born of tradition, but which the author-director claims is not documentary. In Landscape as Evidence, Artist as Witness, Delhi director Zuleika Chowdhury staged a real petition performed as a fictional proceeding under the Commission of Inquiries Act, 1852. In collaboration with the International Artists Association, Code Studios, Chowdhury wrote a petition to today's House of Parliament requesting the government of India establish an inquiry to consider admitting artists and their works as expert witnesses offering testimony in the court of law. The occasion of the performance was the disputed approval of the National River Interlinking Project, a reservoir dam and canal system across several states in central India, designed to capture monsoon rains. Chowdhury's petition, highlights the limitations of the strict rules of evidence under the Indian Evidence Act of 1872, asserting that exclusion of vital evidence which does not fit within traditional means of adducing evidence. The petition asserts that the environmental impact assessment that generated the approval of the River Interlinking Project does not consider issues of displacement, loss of culture, and damage to sacred sites. It reduces the consideration to a cost-benefit analysis. Nature, the petition asserts, is seen as a resource that is exploited by human beings. The petitioners submit that the human beings are an intricate part of the ecosystem and not independent of it. The petition raises questions about the fate of our communities in the context of our ecosystem and our collaborative vision for development and enhancing the livelihoods of all. The question at the center of her petition and the staging of this mock kind of inquiry: why shouldn't artists be called to give testimony from the vantage point of their specialized knowledge, just like economists, historians, engineers, medical doctors, lawyers, and politicians? Testimony that counts as legal evidence in a court of law. Art and law both assert productions of truth and reality, the construction of narratives, a historical frame of reference, and the creation and possibilities of alternative conditions and visions of the present. It is this parallel between law and art that provides an explanation into whether art can allow for a legal paradigmatic shift. I might just add, that's Zuleika's comment, but that theater and law are the most performative languages we have. Quoting Mihir Sampson, the following portion of the petition is an example of the specialized knowledge Chowdhury is asking the courts to admit. And here comes the tiger's wheat, bit of my title. When an ecosystem endures the loss or extinction of an indigenous species or plant, it is not just the tiger or the native wheat variety which has been annihilated. What has been destroyed is the tiger's contribution to the ecosystem in maintaining a balance with other species, the native crop's ability to nourish the human language and its relationship to the tiger, and the complex food culture surrounding the native wheat involving song, dance, spirituality, and countless other facets of the ecosystem's bounty. This is the subtlety, nuance, and intricacy the petitioner entreats, that art captures better than any other mediums or pieces of scientific or anecdotal evidence, close quote. The argument of the petition is this. The approval of the National River Interlinking Project should be reconsidered in light of the omission of testimony from artists, and by extension, artist testimony should be deemed worthy of admittance to the court of law. And the counter-argument is dams and interlinking river projects are necessary for development. Only economists, biologists, engineers, and environmental specialists should be consulted. Artists lack objectivity, making their testimony irrelevant. Chaudhary smartly not only staged the fictional proceeding at the Constitutional Club of India in Delhi, where members of the parliament and bureaucrats gathered to discuss matters of public interest, but also used real officials or former officials as performers. Former Chief Justice of the Chhattisgarh High Court, Justice Yatindra Singh, played the judge. Anand Grover, a senior activist lawyer, performed the lawyer for the state. And Norma Alvarez, an eminent environmental lawyer, played the lawyer for the petitioners. The performance used courtroom rituals such as rising for the judge, testifying under oath, and following court rules of procedure. The first three, I think we're ready. Oh, they're the marigolds. The first three artists, witnesses, filmmaker Ravi Argaval, showed portions of his film, Have You Seen the Flowers?, as evidence for how people along the Yamuna River sustainably grow marigolds. When asked if he was speaking as an artist or an ordinary citizen, Argaval replied, I am an artist because I am a citizen. There's no difference between the two. My art is just a method for talking about issues that I feel strongly about. The second artist, Navot Altaf, showed portions of her film about the vibrant culture of tribes in Chhattisgarh and the change from beautiful to ugly that mining created in their habitat. The third witness, Shiba Chachi, is a philosopher, filmmaker, who studies the relationship between modern and pre-modern myths, including how myths contain other ways of imagining the relationship between human beings and the rest of the natural world. Chaudhary and her colleagues were not able to convince Judge Singh to roll back the approval of the National River Interlinking Project. They were, however, successful in making the Chief Justice acknowledge that artists' work should be admissible as evidence, especially when, quote, and this is the Chief Justice, created in conjunction with the communities living in areas affected by such development projects. In this case, artists must be considered as part of proper evidence and not mere opinion, close quote. At the end of the proceeding, Chaudhary concluded, the hearing has been made in the context of a performance, so it's interesting to see what validity the judgment will have in the real world. The real conclusion remains a question. Theater of the real, that is, theater about real events, is relevant here. Theater of the real is the larger category that incorporates many different forms of theater, including documentary theater, verbatim, reality-based theater, theater of fact, nonfiction theater, theater of witness, restored villages performances, deeply immersive simulation, video games, and biographical and autobiographical theater that quote, cite, and interpolate the real in a variety of ways. The diverse nomenclature indicates the richness of artistic activity and invention and the depth of scholarly inquiry. Rao and Chaudhary's work are just two examples of the kinds of subject matter, the variety of the theatrical techniques, and the potential real-world results that this kind of theater can create, faced with the current climate of emotion and belief, holding sway over actual information and the difficulty of apprehending truth, these artists are making performances that neither present nor invent the real, but are resolutely engaged with it. Legal theorist Richard Sherwin notes that visual images, YouTube photographs, and amateur videos shot from conventional and cell phone cameras, and even court records are used both to prove and contradict legal testimony. Technology cannot simply function as verifying a particular point of view. Interpretation is a constant variable. This state of affairs gives rise to many questions. Does documentary theater have a unique obligation to present the details of policy, for example, when its narrative is political? Should it be obliged to present dialectical argument and counter-argument? Can documentary theater, with this special relationship to the narrative structuring of emotion, become a model of inquiry? Here's what Chowdhury says. The work of art is to act as both a caveat and a catalyst. It can disarm frameworks of certainty by insisting on the ethical and epistemic vitality of the intimate, the desired, and the imagined. By doing so, it acts as a caveat to what people think of or take for granted as the real. Equally, art can also call into being entirely new frames for constructing meaning. Here it is a catalyst. We're free to imagine other worlds because we engage closely with this one. Close quote. Rao and Chowdhury and artists like them are attentive to the ways in which representation can be its own form of manipulation. I would just say, like, certainly is its own form of manipulation. Five Easy Pieces raises the possibility that it may be wrong to make such a work with children, especially when the power dynamics between director and child actors is so extreme. Chowdhury uses a fictional court proceeding not only to call into question the conclusion of a previous actual inquiry, but also to make a new claim, that the testimony of artists and their artwork be admitted as evidence in courts of law. Only when this happens will the intersectionality of the ecosystem be understood. Plants, wheat, human languages, soundscape, song, dance, tigers, and children. Why this direction now? Troubled epistemology, meaning confused and problematic ways of actually finding out what is going on or what has happened, is not new to theater. Digital documents form part of our neural dreams. We live in a world populated with shadows, suspended between the virtual and the real. Podcasts become memories. Film and theater become history. And, I would argue that today, that film and theater are the main ways that people learn history rather than from books. The difference between waking and sleeping, between being live and being recorded, between being present and being a projection of presence is ever more compromised. It's this precariousness that haunts our imagination, that haunts and informs and stimulates our imagination. The entanglement of the live and the digital in relation to the very idea of documentary is reshaping how we know ourselves and the ways that we express our knowledge. Site-specific performances, mixes of biography, autobiography and documentary, fiction and nonfiction, film, visual arts, dance, theater, and performance art are merging. As the digital world becomes the means of documentation, documentaries become more than records. Even when absolute conclusions cannot be had, or maybe even should not be had, understanding itself, or creating understanding itself, is still a generative act. In conclusion, might Rao and Chowdhury be making documentaries of a new world order, a post-colonial Anthropocene? To account for this world and master it, these artists, and artists like them, are building new means of knowledge that hopefully will make reality whole again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Martin. These slides are the performances of Chakri's performance.
It's a little dark. I'm sorry for that. But this is what the actual staging looked like. Yeah, it's kind of a courtroom.
Okay. Thank you very much for the insightful speeches, and I think it's time for us to continue our dialogues. And may I, well, is there any questions from the floor that you would like to ask our speakers, or Professor Sherlock, do you have any response to Professor Martin's speech, or vice versa?
I think it was terrific. Thank you. Thank you for sure.
Would you like yours also?
I do have a question about that Indian performance. So how's the audience reception? They were playing to a selected group of audience, or to the public in general?
They're playing at the Constitution Club in Delhi, which is where bureaucrats and people involved in the court system hang out. It's their club. So
it's a selected group of audience, sort of.
So yes, it was open, but the people who would know about this are basically those people. Zuleika said that her problem is that in India today that the theater community doesn't quite recognize this as theater, and of course she sees it as that. So she had a very long rehearsal process in which she kind of went over the petition with the judge and the lawyers and the artists and rehearsed narrative strategies and positions and ideas that she wanted them to take on, and yet to leave the whole thing at the same time open to improvisation and to leave room for these real figures or employees in the legal system to bring their body of knowledge to how they would structure these considerations within a kind of semi-legal context. So she met with them like over a period of a year. Yeah.
And it was played only once, or
it was
for several
once, only once.
Only once.
Yes. And she has been invited as a guest artist in residence at a couple law schools now to create synergy between these kinds of languages and considerations of evidence. And the most exciting thing about that particular work is the idea that artists have this very nuanced body of knowledge that gets expressed in artwork and that is viable in contexts beyond the immediate, let's say, beyond the immediate slide or film or theater event, that one can bring to bear on in important, literally legal ways, how we understand the world and the kinds of our relationship to environmental impact and relationship to legal decisions.
Very interesting performance indeed for me. Yeah, I would love to see it. Yes, and I want to ask Professor Sherlock, after years of being in Hong Kong and training local talents, so what do you find the relationship between the society and the theatre in Hong Kong?
This is being recorded.
This
is being recorded.
My interest.
Let's say that one of the exciting things at the moment is diversity. Diversity of approaches. And I think that this conference is a representation of that. I think too that, just on a personal level, what kind of theatre practitioners, what kind of artists, what kind of actors, playwrights, dramaturgs, directors should we train for Hong Kong? What kind of dexterity do they need in their imagination? What kind of toolkit do they need in their strategies for making theatre that is relevant and connected? So I think that for me is my kind of concern at the moment. And being, as you probably guess, slightly traditionalist, it's very uncomfortable. But I really relish that discomfort. And I think it's part of our job to look at how we deal with the comfortable and the complacent, and the usual and the quotidian, the things we're used to, and also how we move ourselves to active engagement, to how we deal with the epistemology of digital dreams, how we have that confusion of the validity of our own existence. You know, in Hong Kong, the photograph eats first, so we have to validate our kind of existence by a series of Facebook kind of comments and stuff. And I think too, for me, and I think I wanted to hint at this, is when society is sometimes more dramatic than theatre, when politics is more drama, when politics is more drama or reality TV show compared to theatre, how does theatre respond? And how imaginatively can theatre respond? And I think 5 Easy Pieces is an exceptionally challenging piece of work. Many of us have seen it here, and the different nuanced strategies that the director uses and is culpable of, self-referentially culpable of, I think is kind of interesting. So a long answer, how do we deal with the now and the present? How do we not be seduced to parachute some possibilities, but actually open those possibilities up to what society is asking for now? And I think this is a very exciting time for Hong Kong. It's, I think Hilal Schwartz says that it's always the second generation of seismic and paradigmatic changes, Tesseract, that actually becomes the most creative. It's the post 2.0 people who are the most creative, because there's a kind of stability of technology, there's an expectation. So we're at that time. And we're at that moment where actually creativity can be at the forefront. And I think that's exciting. And I guess I want to say that we have a responsibility to have that creativity at the forefront of our imaginings. And as theatre practitioners, doing this together in a live context, mediated or not, is really important. And so I think I find I'm heartened by the investigations currently happening in Hong Kong in the theatre world, and I look forward to more imagination and more diverse ways of making theatre, not necessarily in the same way as it's being done now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. I think also with the Zuleika example, is bringing theatrical activity to other sites, outside of the theater, and performance knowledge, and using enactment to a variety of ends is an exciting moment. I also think, what is the production of emotion in some of this work? And I would say the production of discomfort, by the end of any work is no longer forbidden. I mean, it hasn't been for a while, but it has a unique iteration now.
Thank you very much. And again, I would like to ask the floor if do you have any response, questions to ask our guests? Yes.
I'm a little bit interested or concerned about the issue or the borderline, or is there any borderline between what Ceri just mentioned about witness and what Professor Martin mentioned about manipulation? So, I have been engaged with a group of, ex-gamblers, Okay, they used to gamble seriously, and then I did a drama to represent them. I think, well, I did some interview with them. I tried to engage them in some workshops and try to understand how they feel or how they think. I try to put the exact wordings into the play, but I also need to, fictionalize something which I think I'm fictionalizing, or I think I'm putting something or representing them in my words. And I am a bit worried whether I am sort of manipulating the reality, or am I actually representing what is the real? Do you see what I mean? Yes.
I would say it may not be an either or. It could be both, and many times it is both. That one is representing and fictionalizing, and at the same time to serve a certain purpose. Whatever the purpose is usually integral to the piece itself. Whether aesthetic, outcome, emotion, all the factors. But I think we don't need to think either or. That would be my initial response.
Yeah, Jack, I was going to say both and. So in a way, particularly looking at verbatim theatre, I think you'll see a spectrum of work that will reflect this diversity of both and. Some will want to faithfully represent the exact verbal words of a tribunal or whatever, and we have representatives here that might want to attest to that. And then there is the fictionalization of the testimony and so on towards the theatrical act. So I think that there's a diversity, and I think that it's the artist's choice and the artist's self-reflexivity, being aware that you're doing these things, that is kind of important as well. Are you aware of your own intervention as a theatre practitioner within this material? So yeah, I'm both and there's a diversity, but it really is up to you as an artist to find out where you are.
Based on what criteria are you judging that you are intervening ethically, or you are intervening in an appropriate way?
Then you've changed the question a little bit. I think ethics is another very, very interesting and very big area in terms of ethical principles in relation to documentary theatre and verbatim theatre, and respecting the ethical parameters that you set out with interviewees, your fictionalization, the empowerment that you give them within that spectrum is very, very important. I think that there is quite a lot written about the ethics of verbatim theatre, and I think that there is a responsibility in relation to that. Aleki Blythe, for example, with London Road, lost a character, a very important character that she was in love with within the piece, because the character was not happy with the representation on stage. So I think one has to be a kind of aware of where you are within the process, your ethical procedures, and also the empowerment of the people that you are representing, and that they are seeing themselves as well, and witnessing. And remember that witnessing is not necessarily an objective act. It's not necessarily an objective act. We can choose to witness what we want to witness. We can choose to ignore the things. We can turn up to witness some things, but we may avoid witnessing other things as well. We may have a kind of reality amnesia to avoid certain things as well. So witness does not necessarily mean objective, but I think being self-reflective is important.
I think that ethics also comes up in terms of what is part of the work and what is excluded from the work. And there's a kind of, I don't know how well known this is, but with the Laramie Project, there's a wonderful essay on forgiveness by Stephen Wang, who was the dramaturg for the project. And he and Moises Kaufman had a bit of a disagreement, I guess you could call it that, about whether or not to include the background of McKinney and Henderson, the two murderers of Matthew Shepard, within the world of the play. It was omitted from the court, right? Is that correct? It was omitted from the court, but it was still known. It was omitted on some kind of court evidence determination, but their very impoverished, violent backgrounds were definitely part of who they are. And Stephen Wang felt that that should have been included in the world of the play to fully characterize them. And Moises Kaufman did not. So you can see the complications of that kind of decision. My understanding is that Kaufman did not want any chance of there being sympathy for the murderers. And Wang was not so much about sympathy, but about the full picture and this idea, the psychoanalytic idea, his father was a psychoanalyst, of forgiveness and what is necessary to that in this situation. Also in that play, I forgot who the friend of Henderson is. He's a Mormon, and Henderson excommunicated from the Mormon church. And I taught this play in Abu Dhabi, and a student of mine who's Mormon said, "At last there's a truthful Mormon character." What do you mean? And she said, so this was something I had never been able to access, because I don't know that much about Mormonism in the world of the play, that the friend, whose name I've forgotten, Doug Laws, stayed with Henderson even after he was excommunicated. And that friend is not just a friend, it's a category in Mormonism in which one is assigned a friend for life. And the friend checks in, gives counsel, is there. And that this was the true spirit of Mormonism beyond that she had never seen before. I mean, and she told us that whole story in class, and we were all amazed because we had no access to it. So the ethics of it is going to be unique to each piece, I think, and to considerations and determinations, and yeah. And it changes over time. I mean, one of my all-time favorite plays is The Investigation by Peter Weiss, and it was at first received horribly. I mean, really, really trashed by critics, and 20 years later, it received great praise. So with a kind of more sophisticated, nuanced understanding of the particular world of inquiry that Weiss was coming from.
Yes, I think, well, in fact, we have all the distinguished guests in the front row. I think, please stay for their session, and I think they will give you great answer. And for me, I would like to chip in this area. I would say, yes, I agree with Professor Sherlock and Professor Martin that don't be afraid to intervene. Documentary theater is always subjective. But you must be aware of that, and I think you must make your interviews. You have responsibility to your interviewees, and you must make them aware of that. And as long as that's the case, then I think is valid. Is valid for an artist to have your imagination, to have your treatment in the subject, I think. So it comes back to Five Easy Pieces, because I saw that play in Berlin this year, and well, yes, I thought that was great, and it provoked me in many different levels. But later, I heard, I don't know whether it is right or wrong, I heard a piece of information saying that because they, in one piece, they portray the parents of one victim, and then I heard that the parents seemed not happy about the representation. Mm-hmm. And when I heard this, I start to have reservation about the piece. Yes, so I think it comes back to the question about ethics, and I think it's up to your own conscience to to have the final word. So I think, yeah, it's good to draw the conclusion to this session. And as I said, please stay. We have more distinguished guests to talk to us. And so now, thank you very much, Professor Martin and Professor Sherlock, to share with us these wonderful thoughts. Okay, so it's time for us to have a coffee and some bites. Okay. So the next session will start at 12 o'clock. Okay, so please come back at 12.